Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to all of you. On behalf of Pakistan Society of Development Economics, this is Ghulam Sarwar. Welcome to all of you over here. Today we are here to discuss some of the papers. Let me introduce our chairperson of this hall, Madam Rehana Siddiqui, professor in Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. And our discussants are Mr. Karim Khan sir, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, and Dr. Muhammad Ali Kamal, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. First we have one of our presenter. He can discuss his paper through, he is online.
Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me? I'm very happy to join in this conference via Skype. Thanks to the wonderful technology that has been put together. This is a paper by myself and my co-author Rabab Muqaddar. She is with the Lahore School of Economics, and I'm joining from the Catholic University of America in DC. The title of the paper is Modeling Foreign Exchange Risk in a Managed Float Regime. So you may be familiar with this debate, the debate between floating rate regimes and the fixed rate regimes. And currently, most of the economists agree that the floating rate regime is preferable to fixed rate regimes. However, the fixed rate regimes will bring short-term stability, but the free floating exchange rates will increase foreign exchange volatility. In economics, if you are familiar with various arguments, most of the arguments have been made from the monetary side, from the point of view of the monetary policy, its impact on exchange rate, the impact of exchange rate flexibility on inflation and credibility of the exchange rate commitments. We are looking at this from a different point of view. We are looking at this issue from the point of view of risk management. But as we know, although the floating rate regime is preferable, there are occasions where people would actually prefer fixed rates to floating rates. Especially for emerging economies, we have three different issues here. For the emerging economies, the liabilities are denominated in foreign exchange currencies, while their assets are in local currencies. The emerging markets have fragile financial systems. The banks and other corporate entities have their balance sheets which are very vulnerable to exchange rate deteriorations. So for that reasons, many developing countries prefer fixed rate exchange, and they exhibit some kind of a fear of floating and adopt a managed regime. Sometimes this is called dirty float. While we have that debate going on, another angle is that how the choice of the regime affects that management. Foreign exchange risk is very real for all players in the global market. If you are importing, exporting, that's there. If you are portfolio management, a portfolio manager, or any other multinational transactions, you have to look into the exchange rate risk. So the exchange rate measurement and management becomes very difficult when we have a fixed rate regime or a managed float. Because first of all, there are substantial and systematic differences in the behavior of exchange rates under the two regimes. Under the fixed rate regime, there is a higher frequency of large fixed rate changes. The floating rate regime make small changes over time, and on a day-to-day basis, the volatility is there, but there are no big changes, big jumps up and down. So many authors have divided this phenomena. On the one hand, we have this so-called normal volatility, but down the road, we have to realign the exchange rate. And as we need to realign the exchange rate, there would be exceptional movements at the time of the realignments. So these movements around the time of realignments creates exceptional volatility, which is very large. So for the management of foreign exchange, we face a dilemma. For many countries, there is a persistent depreciation, which is kind of a secular nature. The dilemma is, should we let the currency slide in small increment gradually, or should we try to maintain a stable exchange rate? But then the realignment becomes inevitable, and we have to make a big adjustment. So what we are doing in this paper is as follows. What we are doing is to look at some of the exchange rate management models. The model which is in vogue is the value at risk measures, and we expand that model to incorporate the extreme value theory. And we do this study against 4 currencies: US dollars, euro, pound, and yen. Our main question is that whether in a managed floating regime, that is against the dollar in case of Pakistan, is it more easy to manage exchange rate risk, or it is less easy to manage exchange rate risk? Or what regime is more amenable as far as the foreign exchange risk management is concerned? So we compare various value at risk models for different exchange rates. And the way we test these models is to do a backtesting technique. With backtesting, we estimate the parameters and then try to see what is the forecasting error, which is we compare the incidence of actual losses versus the predicted losses. In Pakistan, as you would know, that the US dollar is the main currency being managed. The other currencies, euros, pounds, yen, they are basically driven by cross rates. So a number of studies have shown that Pakistan seems to operate rather ad hoc adjustable pegs. And in that, the dollar assumes a very critical role and has a very large influence. At the same time, Pakistan has suffered a series of economic shocks in the past. This is, of course, tragic, but it's also helpful in testing the extreme value theory, because we need a number of extreme observations to really test this extreme value theory or models based on the extreme value theory. So as you may know, the use of value at risk model is now the standard practice ever since JP Morgan's risk matrices and the Basel Agreement in 2004. And these models are based on the empirical distribution of any exchange rate, any marketable securities for which market prices and then the short-term returns are available. So formally, value at risk is defined as follows. It is a high quantile. Typically, they take the 95th or the 99th percentile of the distribution of returns. And then we provide an upper bound on the tails of returns distribution. specifying a certain probability, let's say 5% or 10% or whatever. So this picture would show that value at risk is can easily be visualized as the maximum loss with a certain level of probability that a portfolio or any set of asset will suffer over a defined horizon, let's say 1 week or 1 month or 1 day. Now, when we have actual empirical return distributions, when we observe them, we invariably find that these contain these fat tails. So these are not really normally distributed, but for any financial assets, the fat-tailed distributions are very much part of the reality. So we need to incorporate the thick tails somehow in the model. That we do by applying the extreme value theory. So we are going to use this VAR model, but modified to incorporate the extreme value. And before we do that, we have to make sure that the dynamics of the processes are incorporated. And we do that by implementing GARCH models. From those GARCH models, we extract standardized residuals. And then the VAR model is applied to them, to the residuals. We basically have 5 different models besides the extreme value theory VAR model. We have one which is conditional normal, which is which incorporates the GARCH effect, but is based on normal distribution. Then the second model is the GARCH effect, but using a conditional T distribution. The fourth model is the unconditional, which means that we don't incorporate the GARCH effects, but we do have the extreme value theory based model. The final model is unconditional model, which means that the GARCH effects or the dynamic effects are not incorporated, but we also assume that the returns are normally distributed. So these are competitive models.
Excuse me.
Our data is basically stretching from 99 to 2017. So about 19 years of data. We have about 80. Yes, sir.
I think next 5 minutes, if you can just do that. Because we have 4 other papers here.
Basically, when we do this thing, you can see the difference between the standard deviation of the euro returns versus the standard deviations of the US dollar returns. And you can see that there's a big difference. The dollar, which is the managed float, managed regime, exhibits a very small, relatively smaller distribution, standard deviations. On the other hand, the kurtosis is very high with regard to the dollar versus the rupee. So it basically shows that if you are looking at the managed float, the dollar shows incidence of very extreme returns, and the distribution is highly skewed. So I'm going to skip many of this, the couple of slides I'm going to miss. But when we run the GARCH modeling, we find that all the GARCH processes are very, they are different from currency to currency. So when we talk about euro, we have a autoregressive first order and GARCH 1.1 model, which is the best descriptive of the data. For the dollar, we have a very, a higher order autoregressive process. But for the pound, we have a GARCH 1.2 model, and the Japanese yen is a 2.1 GARCH model. So that just shows that it's very complex and depends upon what currency pair we are really talking about as far as risk management is concerned. I'm going to skip this also because we're running out of time, but basically it shows the same picture. It shows that the dollar versus rupee shows instance of very extreme returns on the upside as well as on the downside. So it's a very big departure from normality. Compared to other currencies, the departure is not that severe. So we do a back testing, which means that for what we do is we take 1,000 observations each time. And based on these 1,000 observations, we estimate the parameters of the risk model. And based on those parameters, then we predict the next day's return and compare that with the actual return. So if the actual return is larger than the predicted return, we call that a violation, or we call that this is a violation of our theoretical model. But so this is a moving window. That means we go one day at a time. We take 1,000 observations, work out the predicted return for the next for one day ahead, and then we take the next 1,000 observations and next 1,000 observations. So it's a moving window. So the results are very informative. You can see over here, as far as US dollar is concerned, the predicted, the expected number of violations were 199. The model predicts only 167 violation, which means that the model is no good. It's a very large departures from the expected observations. But if you just compare with Euro, for example, the model is very close. The prediction is very close. You know, the predicted number of violations were 192, and the observed observations are 201, which means that the model is performing quite well. So here is the very, very sharp difference between a currency which is being actively managed and the euro, which is not so being actively managed. The similar is the situation with the pound, vis-a-vis the pound. As far as the Japanese yen is concerned, there is a mixed bag here, because the Japanese yen itself is not a free float currency. So the Japanese are managing on their side. So it basically compounds the problem. The risk is compounded because on the Pakistan side, we are managing vis-a-vis the dollar, but then the Japanese are managing their currency, so it compounds the prediction. So we do have the model which is performing very well, but this is only, just compare the first line, the first row is that's our conditional VAR model based on the extreme value theory. So I'm just going to conclude here that first of all, we see that the distributional characteristics are very different from one currency to the other currency pair. Secondly, the USD, the dollar rate, which is actively managed float, exhibits a much thicker tails, which means that the normal volatility in normal days, it's very subdued, but occasionally we see a very extreme high volatility around the realignment times. And then we also observe that the dynamic processes are very different from currency pair to currency pair. The dollar also exhibits a notable serial autocorrelation, which may suggest that there may be some speculation builds up as the realignment becomes very obvious and it becomes inevitable. The market participants start to anticipate that, and that can create a serial correlation and can give rise to some arbitrage opportunities. But the interesting thing is that we first of all conclude that the VAR model based on the extreme value theory are the best model, which on the basis of the observed observations. Our backtesting exercises showed that the dynamic adjustments must be made before we can implement these kind of models. But the main conclusion is that these risk models do not perform very well for the currencies which are being managed float, which are on managed float. So that's a very interesting thing, because that means that when there's a debate between managed float or free float, we have to also incorporate this angle that the managed float imposes a certain cost, additional risk and cost. And that is the real risk, because if the currency movements can be anticipated, or we can have the risk management tools applied to them, then much of the risk is taken out. But when a managed float regime, much of that risk is not cannot be diversified or cannot be hedged. We cannot apply hedged methods. Therefore, there's an additional cost on the economic agents, which means that doing business with countries which are on managed floats imposes additional cost on the local participants as well as on the foreign participants. So I'm closing this now, and I look forward to any comments or any observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jamshedupal, for a very interesting presentation here. Unfortunately, your formal discussant is not here because his mother is sick. So if anybody wants to ask any question from here, you have to come there. Yeah. So there is one question from one of the participants here. All of you who want to ask question, please move on this side.
I think those observations are valid, but they are not going to make much difference. What we are trying to do is to see if the risk management models are applicable or not. So our emphasis is on the fat tails, and how do we incorporate that fat tails. Incorporating news is very painstaking, and there are so many news coming in. Unless there is a identifiable event, there are specific events which can be identified with any precision. It is hard to really incorporate that. But obviously, GARCH models can certainly be refined. We can't exclude any of these models, but the point is very valid. If there are GARCH effects, the GARCH effects have to be incorporated. So that's what we conclude, that any risk models must take into account these GARCH effects. And it simply shows that there's a need to model the dynamic process as such.
Okay, any other question? No? Okay, Dr. Jamshedupal, thank you very much for an interesting paper. Maybe your formal discussant will send you the comments by mail, or the management of the PhD will send it to you. And thank you very much again, and if you can stay with us for the other papers, that would be good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We have two papers. One is by Akhtar. Is she here? Please. And the other one is Nazif Ishtiyaq. These two papers, and the discussant for these two papers is Dr. Karim Khan from PIDE. So first two guests can come and present, then the next two paper presenters and the discussant will come. First presenter is Akhtar. She is with NDU, and she has recently completed her work with her PhD. Her paper is on quantifying firm-level innovation in Pakistan and its consequences for public policy. That's a very interesting paper. So
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Akhtar. I work at ITU, and thank you to PSDE for organizing this conference, and I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to talk about firm-level innovation in Pakistan, and So the aim of this study is basically to understand how is it that Pakistani firms approach the notion of innovation. How do they define innovation? And do the firms make a conscious effort to be innovative? Now, all of this seems really great, but it's always good to contextualize things in terms of literature. So I'm going to go back a little and start from Robert Solow. And I'm assuming all of us know what the model looks like because we've been discussing that model. It's been coming up throughout the conference. So he sets up a neoclassical framework for economic growth and essentially tells us that factor growth explains economic growth. And all of that is great because it gives us a theory about the growth rates and expected growth rates and between the developed countries and developing countries. And he comes up with the notion of convergence, that in the long run, the growth rates of developed and developing countries will in fact converge, thus eroding the income gaps. And as early as 1956 and 61, there was this plethora of literature coming up documenting that in fact there wasn't convergence that Solow has predicted. And it goes all the way up until as recent as 2003 and 2005. So if there isn't any convergence, and if there is divergence, then why? And that's what economists are supposed to do. So it seems that that there was something else that's explaining growth, and that brings us to the notion of innovation. Maybe it is the technological productivity, the differing technological productivity between two types of countries that is the explanation. And maybe it's because firms are, some countries are more innovative than the others. Now, when you're talking about innovation, you are talking about uncertainty, because a particular research effort does not, in fact, guarantee innovation. And economists like Dorsey and Schumpeter have been saying this for a while now. Now, when we're thinking about innovation, sometimes we think it's something so radical, like the iPhone is an innovation, but not necessarily. Very simply, innovation is something that sets the course for a technical or an economic solution. So you have a problem, and if you adapt to it, if you figure out a solution, that's also an innovation. So that's a basic innovation. And then there are incremental innovations that work around it, and that's what improves the trajectory of firms and of countries. So in a sense, that's what firms do. They incrementally innovate and adopt an innovation. If you're thinking about it that way, then innovation affects the pattern of growth. Then it makes sense to study innovation. And when you're thinking about innovation, you also have to think about institutions, because innovation does not happen in a vacuum. You have to have a certain set of conditions that make it possible for you to innovate. And when I'm saying you, it means firms primarily. So then, to study firm-level innovation, what do? We are economists. We have to make use of some model. So I started working with the CDM model, which was developed by Crepon, and that is considered the canonical model when you're looking at firm-level innovation. It is a sequential model, and I'm going to talk about that. Different people have adapted this model depending on data availability. So what is it that the model does? You estimate the knowledge function, then you estimate the innovation function, and eventually you link it to productivity. So you're asking the very basic question: does innovation translate into increased productivity? Because that's what we're being told, theoretically. Now, when you're estimating the knowledge function, this is the equation that we're estimating. And to do this, I used a doubly censored Tobit regression model, and eventually this is what the model looks like. That a firm's research effort is a function of whether the firm is an exporting firm, what its market share look like, whether it perceives tax rate to be an obstacle, whether it perceives corruption to be an obstacle, whether the age of a firm impacts. The dependent variable is total research expenditure per worker. This is the sum of the intra and extramural research, the cost of training of employees, and the cost of acquiring new equipment. The second step is the innovation function, in which we look at the dependent variable is an innovation outcome, the product innovation or the process innovation, and that is a function of whether an educated or a skilled labor force is perceived to be an obstacle by Pakistani firms, what is the size of a Pakistani firm, and the predicted research effort from the first step. And to do this, I conducted a bivariate probit regression. And then eventually there is the productivity equation, which is, we run a regular OLS regression because the data allows us to do as much. And we've applied this to firms that are within the industrial specification code of 15 to 36, for which there was non-negative total factor productivity available. And we'll use the predicted values of product and process innovation from the second step and take into account the log of capital to labor ratio. The data. So to do all of this analysis, it sounds great on paper. We can do all of this, but we're all constrained by our data. And the reason why this analysis was possible, and there's nobody else in Pakistan who's done this as yet, is because the data is relatively new. So there is, the World Bank does a survey called the Enterprise Survey, and it did as much for Pakistan, and 1,247 firms did it. Now, after you complete the enterprise survey, firms can volunteer to fill out the innovation module. So 696 firms have responded to the innovation module, and that is the data source. There are no utility firms included in this sample. There are no public firms that are part of this sample. There are only privately held enterprises that are a part of this sample. So when we're talking about firms, we're talking about actual private sector here. Very briefly, we're defining product and process innovation in line with the Oslo manual, because that helps us conduct the analysis. That is what the surveys, when the survey is asking questions, it is using the Oslo manual. And that's a good thing, because when we're trying to compare Pakistan's performance across with other countries, we don't have to worry about differences in definition. So just a couple of pictures before I give you the results is we have data in which we can quantify firm innovation by sector. I don't know whether, oh, you can see it. So while it seems that real estate is very, very innovative, I would like to point out that this is where the IT sector is enveloped, and there are only 8 out of the 696 firms that are part of the real estate sector. And you can see that process innovation really spikes up. So that really makes sense, because there are IT firms. Other than that, construction does a remarkable amount of marketing innovation, which is very, very interesting. Then we can look at firm level innovation according to age size. Now, in the Western world, what happens is that younger firms tend to be more innovative. In Pakistan, it's the flip. Firms that are older tend to be conducting more product and process innovation compared to firms that are younger. Firm innovation by size. Now, here again, every time when we're talking about policy in Pakistan, we say SMEs. And as you'll see that the medium-sized firms seem to be outstripping others in terms of reported levels of innovation. I'd also like for you to take into account what the large firms are doing, because this has consequences for when I present the results. Okay, and this is firm innovation in terms of the research and development that they're actually conducting. And what we're reporting here is the percentage of firms that are responding yes to conducting internal research and development, external R&D, training, purchasing new equipment, purchasing licenses, because we're taking all of this into account when we're trying to explain the research effort of firms. And as you can see, the figures are remarkably low. And that brings us to this one. This is the first set of results, which is the knowledge intensity function. Now, what we're doing here is the doubly censored Tobit regression. And just to say it in words, it seems that firms in Pakistan that are exporting firms tend to conduct more research and development. Yes. Okay. Firms that want to increase their market share tend to spend positive sums on research and development. Tax rate obstacle is not perceived to be a big problem. Perceived corruption decreases firms' research and development expenditure. And age significantly, the older the firm is, it spends more amount on research expenditure. The innovation function. These are the probabilities for conducting a particular type of innovation, the product and the process innovation. And you'll see that the lack of skilled labor force decreases the firm's probability to innovate. So this isn't something like, it's not off the cuff remark, we've documented it. Medium-sized firms, if a firm is medium-sized, there is a higher probability of that firm conducting any type of innovation. Large-sized firms do not. And then you can see that there is a positive relationship between the research effort of a firm and the innovation outcomes. The productivity equation. Here we see that firms that tend to be, that are conducting product innovation tend to be more productive. So there is, that's the big takeaway here, that it does make sense for firms to be innovative in Pakistan. It pays to be innovative. Okay, very quickly, because I'm very short on time. Pakistani firms are inhibited from investing in developing research and development on accounts of perceived corruption. We can document that now. Exporting firms and firms that are trying to increase their market share will spend more positive sums on research and development. As I mentioned, the problem of the lack of skilled labor force, that's a problem. Okay, now what is it that we can do about it? I think it's important to streamline your financial sector, and in that sense, what the chairman of, the governor of State Bank said was very heartening to hear. Secondly, we really need to be able to increase how much of our GDP we're devoting to research and development expenditure. The statistics are abysmal. In 2013, it was only 0.39% of our GDP was diverted to research and development. And one big problem is that all the folks that are skilled labor force are employed in the higher education sector. And I'm guilty of that as myself. So it is important to bridge that gap between industry and academia, and there is evidence for this. There is no evidence, and there is a variable in our data which allows us to look at whether foreign firms tend to be more innovative in Pakistan, and that does not come out to be statistically significant. And this is where I would say that we really need to look at how we're dealing with CPEC with a bit of caution, because the way around it is to perhaps mandate a certain portion of sales or proportion of budget for foreign firms to be devoted to research and development. Interestingly, firms do not respond significantly to political instability. So it seems that Pakistani firms seem to take that in a stride. And lastly, this is my last comment, is about large-size firms. Because most of the large-size firms are in the manufacturing sector, and the manufacturing sector is more than 80% of your sample. And it's important to make them innovative as well. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we should also be able to plug in and solve problems that we're already facing. And very briefly, large-size firms tend to rate telecommunication obstacle to be a problem. So maybe that's a place that we need to address to be able to encourage large-size firms to be more innovative. And that's all.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, sir.
So my name is Ahmed Chaudhary, and I've co-authored this paper with Mr. Nazif Ishtiyaq, and we represent Information Technology University here. So, so we're going to talk about that. What are the key determinants of long-run economic growth of a country in light of the recent evidence that has emerged in this regard? So the central argument that we have posed in our paper is that the long-term development of any country, it critically depends upon the type of products it produces. So the more the number of products or the newer products that a country is producing, that means if a country has a more diversified industrial structure, the better would be its long-term economic growth. Now, why is that? The reason is that we have to go back to, to understand it, to the Industrial Revolution. We know that during the Industrial Revolution, the technological change was happening, innovation was taking place, and due to this, the economies were growing. But a subtle characteristic of this Industrial Revolution was that underlined the rapid industrial and economic growth during the Industrial Revolution was a process of continuous expansion in the range and type of products. So during that time, newer products were being produced, new types of industries were emerging, and that was basically causing the economic growth in the end. So what we are exploring in this paper. So what we're basically talking about is that there was a time in 1960s when Pakistan was expected to become the next Asian tiger. That promise is still alive according to PricewaterhouseCoopers report. PricewaterhouseCoopers report. Pakistan can become the 16th biggest economy in terms of purchasing power parity by 2030. So the promise of becoming an industrial giant and economically developed country is still alive. But what went wrong? That is what we're discussing. So we believe that Pakistan has been unable to diversify its industrial structure, and that is the core reason for that. We believe that a number of early development economists commented on that, and they knew the importance of industrialization and industrial diversification, East Asian tigers realized its importance, and the recent literature on product space and economic complexity supports this view. So let's talk about each in turn. The early development economists. So all of these people, including Hirschman, Schumpeter, Prebisch, and Singer, one of the direct implications of their work is that developing countries must industrialize in order to have a long-term economic growth and economic development. So that is what they emphasized on. Let's see what the product space is. So coming to that. And this is the recent evidence on this issue. So a product space is basically a graphical representation. It tells us about the interrelationship between different type of products that are being exported and traded in the world. It is basically application of the network theory. As you can see in the diagram, I've shown the diagram for Pakistan. So at the center of that diagram is the core of the product space. And core represents more advanced and more sophisticated products. The sides of the product space primarily represents, which is the periphery, they represent products which are less sophisticated. And you can see that in case of Pakistan, we can see the blue dots on the left side of the picture, which primarily represents the textile sector in Pakistan and primarily represents unsophisticated products that are being produced in Pakistan, even in 2015. I'll talk on this more by the end of my presentation. So let's talk about what this recent evidence implies. So it says that different products have different types of, have different effects on development of a country. So for example, if you're specializing in textile industry, there is a different kind of, you will end up with a different kind of development at the end of the day, rather if you're specializing or trying to specialize in, for example, electronics or manufacturing or machines, etc. We believe that, and there are a number of studies here, Houseman, and I've quoted these studies. Similarly, according to Eames and Waxia, they say they provide strong empirical evidence about that as the incomes of economies increase, these economies become more industrialized and more diverse and more and less concentrated. So basically, income growth is highly correlated with diversification at the end of the day. Product space, economic complexity index. Economic complexity index basically shows, it's a numerical measure which shows how countries are placed within the product space and how countries are ranked. According to Houseman in 2014, he states that economic complexity index is strongly associated with high per capita income growth and is a much better predictor of growth than traditional measures of institution, competitiveness, and human capital. So we believe that we can rely on economic complexity in order to understand the long-run economic growth of any country. So this is the graph which primarily shows Pakistan with other countries, and we've taken other countries, the criteria of selecting other countries was these countries in 1960s were below Pakistan. So as you can see, the blue line, which is in 1964, which is on the highest point, represents Pakistan, and over the period of time, Pakistan has dropped or fallen below in terms of its product and product sophistication and diversification, and other countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil, and Turkey, have developed more complex economies. So that is one of the key issues that we're trying to address. So this is the product space in another form for Pakistan, and we can see that textile and garment sectors have been throughout dominated Pakistan's industrial landscape. Okay, so let's try to analyze what went wrong and why Pakistan has been unable to diversify. So there are 4 reasons that we point out. Number 1 is absence of a long-term vision. So we believe that long-term vision is basically about where where a country wants to see itself in the technological ladder in the next like 15 to 20 years. We believe that in Pakistan's case, it has been largely absent. A number of renowned economists have also identified this issue. We believe that the shifting in policies and different policies followed in each decade is one of the reasons. So, and we've quoted 5-year plans here, and these are conservative estimates, by the way. And let me read it out for you what these plans say. So it's written in the second 5-year plan that the economic and social objectives of Pakistan are long-range goals. The nation aspires to a standard of living for all its people, and I emphasize here, as high as it can be achieved with resources given to it. The second 5-year plan may set to have a single underlying purpose to advance the country as far as possible within the next 5 years. So the phrases in themselves, as high as it can be achieved as far as possible, show that we lacked a clear long-term vision that where we want to be in the next 10 to 15 years. Then again, we never had a comprehensive long-term plan. So one time a prospective plan was made in the third 5-year plan. It was made for the next 20 years. It was said that we would revise this prospective plan in the coming 5-year plans as socio-economic changes would occur. But the fourth plan never even mentioned its revision. Then again, it shows about the seriousness of our policy. And this is very interesting. So I've quoted an extract, and this is one of many examples from 3rd and 4th 5-year plans in which the text of the plan are exactly the same. So this is an extract and I've highlighted the change. So in the 3rd plan, it was written that it's from the 3rd plan, and the 4th plan, the 3rd was changed to 4th, and the text was not changed at all. Then again, it points out how serious we were related to our industrial planning and industrial development. It's one of those examples. There are many other examples in the original plans. So let's move on. Second point is that Pakistan has failed to achieve its time-bound targets. So basically what we mean by that, then again, let's come to the examples. In the 3rd plan, it is written, the first plan was over-optimistic in certain respects, and in its implementation seriously suffered because of absence of adequate government support. So again, these are conservative comments on our planning, which shows that we were unable to achieve what the targets we set. Again, some more quotes, and these are some of the quotes from a long list of quotes that are there. In the 6th plan, it is written, the policy package was developed for electronics industry has so far been ineffective. In 8th plan, it is written, 7th plan could not achieve fully the integration of science and technology with development plans and production sector. No attractive incentives were given to the private sector to encourage investment in R&D. So these are quite self-explanatory. Lack of performance-oriented incentives, that we were unable to attach any performance-oriented incentives with our industry. So for example, we've seen that textile industry has been protected over the years without giving any sort of set targets or incentives. For example, these incentives could have been given in the form of export quotas, that if you export a certain amount only, then you would be given protection, otherwise not. So such performance-oriented incentives have been largely absent in Pakistan's case. We believe that protection is important, but overprotection is not is something that we should avoid in Pakistan's case. So we should not end up. So basically, what we did was we end up spoiling our infants. As McCartney notes, that Pakistan has been unable to attach performance-oriented conditions to subsidies, and large firms were able to form alliances with powerful political factions. So that is what McCartney says about this issue. Last point before I move on to some more analysis, that Pakistan has a uncompetitive and rent-seeking industrial structure throughout its history. And we have several examples for that as well, as Kamal and Seligo and Stern and other people, including Hussain, are pointing to this issue of rent seeking. comparison with East Asia, we believe that East Asian countries, they had a clear long-term vision, and a number of authors recognize this fact. Ha-Joon Chang has specifically quoted the case of South Korea, saying that they had a very clear vision of industrial policy. In case of East Asian tigers, we have certain examples about how certain performance-oriented incentives were attached. Protection was only given to certain industries for a limited time period. So basically what we mean by all this, that these countries of these East Asian tigers basically had a clear vision that where they want to take their country in the next few years. So, and this is my last section, we're comparing Pakistan's export structure with some East Asian countries. So here you can see Pakistan's and Malaysia's evolution of export structures. Pakistan has clearly has dominated in textile sector and garment sector, while as we can see in case of Malaysia, they have gradually developed their electronics industry while we were unable to do so. We were unable to diversify into sophisticated products. This is comparison with South Korea. Again, we can see that there was a point when South Korea also exported garments and textile, but they gradually moved on towards developing more sophisticated products, and we did not. And the reasons I've already explained. So this is comparison of product space of Pakistan with Malaysia in 1970 and 2015. As we can see, Pakistan in 1970 in 70s textile dominated. In case of Pakistan, still we've developed a bit more in textile, but we haven't able to go to the core of the product space in which there are more sophisticated products. In case of Malaysia, we see that how they have gradually moved towards the core. And I think this graph would explain it much better. So the inner circle basically represents the core of the product space in which more sophisticated products are being produced. We see that in case of Pakistan, we're still at the periphery, and in case of Malaysia and South Korea, that how they've dominated the core of the product space, which tells us a lot about their long-run economic development in the light of this recent evidence. So in conclusion, we want to say the basic question that we've posed, that why Pakistan has been unable to diversify. We believe that Pakistan must decrease their reliance on textile industry, not to ignore them altogether, which we typically tend to do, but to gradually move towards other more advanced sectors such as electronics or manufacturing machinery. We must have a clear long-term vision that where we want to go, and for that we need a national consensus, just like we have a national consensus in terms of terrorism. For terrorism, we have a national policy for security. We believe that it is very important to have a national policy for industrial growth and industrial planning as well, and we believe that policy and not politics should be done on this matter. And lastly, we believe that a plan is as good as its implementation. We've read the plans. We believe that they were fantastic 5-year plans. Issues were pointed out, but it was humbly admitted that those problems could not be solved. Though that is what we need to work on as a country, and we need to diversify our export structure. Thank you so much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First, start with the paper of ISA. Quantifying firm-level innovation in Pakistan and its consequences for public policy. So the idea in the paper is nice, and also it is well written, but there are always rooms for improvement before submission to any respectable journals. Actually, as you saw, that the paper is actually focusing on 3 equations: knowledge function, innovation function, and productivity equations. Actually, the author is claiming that actually she is proving what actually leads to research knowledge, the intensity of knowledge, or the innovation in the economies, and how it affects productivity in Pakistan. And she is doing this by using the World Bank Firm Level Enterprise Survey. Actually, starting from the knowledge equation, actually she claims that exporting firm market share and edge of the firm increase knowledge intensity. And similarly, corruption is declining intensity. Now look at what are actually the problems with this specification. Actually, it is missing some really relevant variables. For instance, actually, if you see, most of the innovations in the economies are actually driven by the competitiveness, especially market competition. The competition between alternative research structure is just like the competition between genetic competition. As the successful genes in the genetic competitions are staying alive while the successless genes are faded out, similar is the case with alternative research structures. Most of the knowledge intensity or innovations are actually made from the perspective of competitions. Firms do compete in the market, and for that perspective, actually they do innovate or they do research. So actually it is a very important variable which is missing in this specification. Similar is the case with the role of the state. If we see Ahmed mentioned in East Asian countries are the successful economies, most of the research initiatives are actually driven by the state because actually it is costly, mostly for firms. So the state initiate, and then actually the private sector comes out in order to support the initiative. Now look at here the third specification, which is a productivity equation. She's claiming that innovations, or you can say the research knowledge intensity is increasing productivity. Actually, I agree with this. But actually, recently we did a study for the World Bank for handicraft industries. And actually, my argument was this. We used innovation as one of the explanatory variables, but there were other variables which were significant in my specifications, like number of workers, working hours of the laborers, physical capital, workers' ethics, education, experience, market-related factors, and state-related factors. Actually, none of these variables are included in the specifications of the productivity equations. So actually, these results are clearly then biased. You have to control for the control variables, otherwise you cannot claim. When you are actually looking at impact, you can look at it in two ways. Either we just drug का हम impact देखना चाहते हैं. We make a control group and one treated group. Then we can see the impact. Similarly, or we can do it by historical things. But actually, you are seeing impact, so you have to take into account the other control variables which might lead to the productivity increase. So these are my comments, and I will post it in written to you on email. Now look at the second variable, which is presented by Ahmed. Actually, it is very well-written paper. And actually, there are two themes of the paper. The first theme is how diversification leads to economic growth. And the second theme is how Pakistan is ranked low in terms of economic complexity index. And the paper is making arguments by comparing Pakistan with some East Asian countries. Actually, now again, the paper is written, but it is just, to my observation, it is just descriptive study. So we cannot actually have concrete arguments based on just descriptions. Why actually it is the case? Look at here. First theme, how innovations or diversification leads to economic growth. Actually, if you see in Pakistan, economic growth is never driven by economic fundamentals. 1960s, actually, it was driven by the Ayub Khan's policy of import substitutions and export promotion. But actually, that policy was mainly driven by the Cold War motives. Actually, Pakistan was supporting US in the Cold War perspective, and in return, Pakistan was getting generous aid. And Ayub Khan was actually using, in order to promote capitalistic structure in that time, those resources for subsidies and protection. And secondly, the second growth trajectory in Pakistan economy was the Zia's time. Again, it was aid, which was driven by Afghan war. And in the third time, you see the growth trajectory is driven by the Musharraf time. Again, it was war. So in Pakistan, actually, growth is driven by wars rather than by economic fundamentals. So we cannot claim very sophisticatedly that growth is driven by diversification. And second, actually, I agree that diversification might play a role in economic growth. But actually, you are sidelining other theories. Since 2000, there are three perspectives to the economic growth. One is the institutional perspective, according to which institutions actually drive economic growth. The second is geography perspective, SAARC and group. And the third is Dutch disease, that natural resources is actually the curse. So the natural resources countries are a curse for the countries. So actually, you are sidelining those theories and just basing on your argument and description, you say that diversification is the main reason. Of course, it might be the reason, but actually you have to again control for the other things. Otherwise, you cannot claim this. And second, how Pakistan is actually ranked low in terms of economic complexity index. I agree to that point. Actually, in Pakistan, diversification is very low. Even first, product diversification is low. Second, actually, we don't have process diversification. Product diversification, of course, we couldn't diversify from our exports from textile or primary products to some engineering goods and these type of things. And there is a clear justification for this. Actually, again, the role of the state in informal setup. Karachi is the main hub, but actually since 1990s we don't have the informal setup, which is suitable for innovations, or you can say it for diversification. People are actually closing their existing structures, so how can they diversify? This is the main reason. And similar is the case with the process innovation, because we couldn't did anything for process diversification. So these are the main comments which I could give. And the other thing is, actually, you actually comparing East Asian countries to Pakistan and making the argument that diversification leads to economic growth. But actually, this is a very strong assumption. You are claiming that all other things in the East Asian countries and Pakistan are similar. And just the diversification is different, and because of that difference, actually, East Asian tigers are tigers and we are not. So actually, these are very strong assumptions. You have to clarify this. And not all other things are similar between us and them. So these are the main comments which actually I wanted to give. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Muhammad Imran Khan. I am environmental economist. My question is that you are talking about innovation and economic growth, but specifically in context of Pakistan, Pakistan is factor-driven economy, not innovation-driven economy. What are your comments on this? Thank you.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम मोहम्मद अजीम है, मैं एनवायरमेंटल इकोनॉमिक्स का स्टूडेंट पाइड से। मेरा क्वेश्चन है एजा से, डॉक्टर एजा से, द इनोवेशन इफेक्ट्स ऑन एनवायरमेंट आर रियल. We know that there is the effect of innovation on environment. You are not discussed regarding the environmental taxes. Why?
Thank you for the comment, sir. I appreciate that. I agree that competitiveness drives innovation. There is theoretical evidence for it. There is empirical evidence for it. But I was constrained by the data that I was using. So there is no question within the survey which addresses the competitiveness issue, which is why it could not be incorporated in the model. Number one. Number two, as far as the role of the state is concerned, when the firms are asked to respond to it, with regards to process innovation, when it came to cooperation with the government, 0% of the firms responded positively to cooperating with the government. 0.6% of the firms responded to cooperating with the government in terms of product innovation, which is why it doesn't show up. And as far as the specification of the knowledge function is concerned, as I mentioned, it's a doubly censored Tobit regression. When it was run for the first time, it took into account firm characteristics, demand factors, and investment climate. And then it was run again with the significant variables, which is why the knowledge function looks the way it does. That does not mean that I'm ignorant of other factors that could explain to the model. A, there is no data for it. B, there is no significant relationship that is popping up. As far as the productivity equation with respect to workers and worker ethics, I completely agree. As far as the data that I have, it talks about how many layers there are between the worker and the top management. There is no question about worker ethics such per se, which makes it impossible to take it into account. Does that mean that would not add to it? Absolutely not. And I agree with you, but it's just that I cannot plug in a different data source with one particular data source which is driving the analysis itself. And so your question regarding the environment, the only data that we have right now is whether the firms are conducting a particular innovation in response to an environmental problem, as which is another way of saying that if there is an environmental regulation, is the firm conducting a particular type of innovation in response to that. And for that also we have the data is binary in nature. It's either a yes or a no. That's why it couldn't feature here.
Thank you so much. So I'll respond to your question. You said in Pakistan, growth is factor driven and not innovation driven. But in the end, you need to make something out of those factors. You need to produce some products or some services out of those factors that you have. In the end, we believe that the more sophisticated and the more diversified products that you're producing using those factors would contribute significantly towards the long-run economic growth of Pakistan. So I don't think that these 2 points are in contention.
My topic is do income growth and trade expansion relocate ecological footprints, a case study of Pakistan. As we know that we have seen the economic profile of Pakistan over three days in this session. First, I would like to discuss that economic growth of Pakistan is now, no doubt, Pakistan is growing over the time in terms of key macroeconomic indicators. Key macroeconomic indicators have shown a rapid improvement over last 3 to 4 or 10-15 years, we can see, but with some fluctuations. We can see that the economy of Pakistan has had a real GDP growth of 4.71 in 2016 according to Economic Survey of Pakistan, and the per capita income of Pakistan has grown from $500 to $1,560 from 1990s to 2015. We can see the economy is improving by sector-wise. Only agriculture sector has shown the negative growth of 0.19%, which is almost negligible and is the highest decline in last 14 years. And the industrial sector has shown 6.8% growth, and followed by the growth of 5.7% in services sector. Now we can see that economy over the time is growing, but this growth of economy has certain applications toward the environment, where we can see that economy of Pakistan has projected 200 projects in environment which are being implemented in capacity building, water storing and other economic indicators for other capacity building activities. What is ecological footprints? Do income growth and trade expansion relocate ecological footprint? This is a question. But first we know what is ecological footprints. Ecological footprint is actually the measurement technique which shows that how much resources we have that re-innovate itself and how much we are using over the time. It is just like we can see that how much resources, how much land. It is basically this ecological footprint is basically measured in terms of global hectares of land area, which is 0.8 for Pakistan. That means that a Pakistani person, if support the his consumption and production and waste absorption activities of his life, he will require 0.8
0.8 global hectares of land. And the same is the case with Islamabad ecological footprint. One of our friend studied Islamabad ecological footprint, Usman Ali from Department of Environmental Economics. He concluded that Islamabad people need 4.8 global hectare of land to sustain their consumption and production and waste absorption activities. So ecological footprint on the other side, if we are only talking about ecological footprint, ignoring the biocapacities, it is just like an aeroplane without gauge, which is too much dangerous after some time. Biocapacity of Pakistan is 0.4 according to Global Footprint Network, and according to our study, it is about 1.1 ecological footprints biocapacity. Moving on to the what is the mechanism of reallocation, income growth and ecological footprints. The mechanism is basically discussed by three ways. First is the scale effect, where economies grow over the time, and the scale effect shows the negative environmental consequences, and there is a high environmental pressure on the planet. The second is a technical effect, where the economies over the time by economic growth, they are enabled to connect with other countries, and the trade make them able to exchange the technology, the better environmental technology, to reduce the environmental pressure. The third is composition effect, that is basically affiliated with the production process, where the composition of inputs changes over the time, and the environmental pressure and the CO2 emission from the product production changes over the time. So we are basically moving from dirty products to clean products. Let's see. This is the ecological footprint by income group. We can see that a higher income group have higher ecological footprints. And the second line, which is declining, that is the world biological capacity, which is over the time declining. The third line, which shows from the above, the third line which shows the low middle income group ecological footprint. So it shows the still middle group are within the biological capacity of the world average, but higher income groups have crossed the biological limits of productive space provided by the nature. And the third line, the last line, which is below the all lines, shows the world low income group ecological footprint, which is already within the biological capacity. These are the objectives of our study. So we have based on this idea, we have constructed these objectives to decompose the ecological footprint of product into production, consumption and trade over time from 1980 to 2015. And to determine the outflow of CO2 emission as a result of trade, commodity trade, and to investigate the EKC type relationship between production, consumption in various goods and services, and subsequently their ecological footprints. These are a research question, which is just the difference between objective and research question is the only language. Literature review. Here we have studied a lot of previous studies regarding the economic growth of Pakistan, trade of Pakistan, EKC, which some studies are supporting, some studies are opposing. We have seen studies for each and every variable, the inclusion of each and every variable, and we have seen that we have also included the studies from which we have taken the ecological footprint standards to calculate the total ecological footprint of consumption production. The overall summary of the literature is that studies investigated in previous literature, which shows that some studies shows that EKC exists for Pakistan, but not in the case of ecological footprint, because no one has studied yet ecological footprint in the case of Pakistan with such kind of idea that first income grows, the environmental pressure increases in terms of ecological footprint, not in terms of CO2. And then up to some extent after then we increase the demand for environment and the pressure decreases over the time. So we have collected these standards for the calculation process. These are standards used for the ecological footprints, specifically product-wise ecological footprints, because we are disaggregating the area-wise and activity-wise ecological footprint to specific product-wise ecological footprints. CO2 emission of production and consumption over the time, the trend is increasing. This is the ecological footprint of imports and exports, which shows that imports ecological footprints are much more higher than the exports ecological footprints. Our data and methodology, we have a number of variables: per capita income growth, consumption footprints, import footprints, production footprints, export, openness of trade, other covariates. Nature of the data used, we have taken time series data of production, consumption, and export and import of these commodities from WDI and World Development Indicator Economic Survey of Pakistan and statistical yearbooks. Then we have multiplied the imports ecological footprint standard with the goods imported, and the exports same way, and the production ecological footprint standard with the goods produced in Pakistan. And consumption ecological footprint is basically calculated by the production ecological footprint plus the imports ecological footprint minus export ecological footprints. And same is the case with biocapacity, which we have calculated with available standards of yield factor and land space conversion factor. Econometric methodology, we have simply, yes ma'am, we have used ADF and other diagnostic tests which are necessary for implication of ARDL model. Basically our data satisfy. These are the results of our study, which shows the consumption ecological footprint. The three boxes shows that the consumption ecological footprint are much more higher than the production and imports ecological footprints separately. If we can see, the imports ecological footprints are quite much close to the production ecological footprints, because as much we are producing, that much we are importing for the from the other economies in terms of ecological productive space. And these are the accounts of ecological footprints, which shows the higher line is consumption ecological footprints, and the second line is ecological biocapacity, which we have calculated by conversion factors and other standards. The third line shows the production ecological footprints, imports ecological footprints, and the last line is export ecological footprint, which is the lowest. These are the confirmation results that we may not face spurious kind of regression. After that, we selected model by this criteria, the minimum value, and then we had a bound test, which allows us, the F statistic value shows is greater than the both of the critical bound values, which allows us to move on to long run the jointly co-integration through ARDL modeling. These are the main results of consumption ecological footprints, which shows that income growth, current income growth is not responding to the ecological footprint of Pakistan. But previously, income growth has an effect on the ecological footprints. Starting ecological footprint are increasing with income growth, but the income square shows that ecological footprints after income growth increasing to up to some extent, the ecological footprint are associated negatively, means the ecological footprint will decrease after the certain growth of income level. Our trade is positively associated, population is positively but not significant, because this is product specific ecological footprint, that might be the reason. And biocapacity is positively associated with ecological footprint. That means if we have more natural resources, we will use it to for more development. That will lead to the higher ecological footprint. And in last, we have energy per capita that is significant, positive and significant with 10%. Imports ecological footprint confirmation result that we may not face spurious regression, that then we have model selection with the same criteria, and we applied bound test, which allows us to move on for the final estimation. And then we have lost in the final results of imports ecological footprints. Imports and consumption we have disaggregated. This was the main aim of the study, that we could disaggregate the ecological footprint of total consumption to the imports, exports and production. but production and exports are covered in one more paper. So now we have footprints are reallocated with the income, and same is the case of consumption. This shows that we are our results in terms of ecological footprints of imports shows that over the time income is growing. First, we demanded products to satisfy the said demand of the economy. Then after some time, if the economy grows to that level of income growth, then we will be caring about the environment, and we do care about our environment and reduce the environmental, we can say, polluting products demand. So ecological footprints of Pakistan, I should conclude, I think we have limitation of time. Ecological footprint of Pakistan are basically reallocated by income growth, but the current income growth is not significant in our study. The study found that the consumption footprint and production footprints are relocated due to income growth over the time. Also, these evidences follow long-run association over the time. The imports are smaller than footprints of products produced in Pakistan, which is good for us in terms of saving biological capacity space in Pakistan. It means if we produce the same product in Pakistan, it will cost higher environmental pressure and extraction of resources from our reserves. If these products are imported from other economies on reasonable economic transaction, it is possible that these products might help Pakistan increasing the welfare of increasing population. Policy recommendation, we have 4 points in our policy recommendation. First is tariff on more polluting products should be imposed where the country do not care about the exporting products' negative environmental consequences. If a country is caring about the negative environmental consequences of exporting products and they have CO2 emission or environmental taxes, those should not be included in this. Improvement of product processing technology which can make it better for the future, that we can save the ecological bioproductive space of our economy. Imports of resource-hungry products instead of producing within the economy. Products which are resource-hungry should be imported as compared that we produce here in our economy. Use of less CO2 emission inputs that leads to the composition effect. We can change the composition from dirty to clean inputs to make the environment better for future generation. Limitation, every study has some limitation. A study selected products which we selected for our study. This is only because of limitation and they are carrying embodied environmental negative consequences. These environmental negative consequences were estimated for a few products. That was the reason that we included some selected products. The data of distance from port to port was not efficiently organized. Distance is a temporary limitation of the study. It might be covered in working papers if the data was convenient to use. Thank you very much.
My name is Muhammad Adil Salim, and I'm going to present my presentation on nexus between economic impact and tolerance, a case study of Peshawar. As I have a very short of time, so I might skip most of the slides. So here we go. Okay, what is tolerance and why is tolerance in economic setting? Well, tolerance, there are a number of factors that might be responsible for high economic growths, like technology, knowledge, and human capital. One of the possible factors frequently ignored in economic literature is the tolerating behavior of the tolerating attitudes of the society. Richard Florida defined tolerance as the openness, inclusiveness, and diversity of all ethnicities, races, and walk of life. Tolerance can be defined as the acceptance of different attitudes that may be different from one's own attitude. So a tolerant person accepts the presence and participation of all kind of people in the society. Tolerance plays an important role in economic growth and well-being of a society. In addition to the neoclassical theories, recent research is focused on 3Ts, that is tolerance, talent, and technology theory of economic growth. Idea of 3T was first presented by Richard Florida. The more tolerant a person, the more it attracts talented people, which in turn attract high-tech industries, and it leads to a virtuous cycle of economic development and growth. Well, as we know that CPEC will also provide employment opportunities to over 1 million of people, and hence it will uplift the socio-economic status of the common person. Though the project of though the CPEC is of great importance, so however its smooth implementation is a challenging one. In the past, Pakistan is adversely affected by terrorism, and many development projects are failed to achieve its expected outcomes because of the intolerant behavior of the society. This situation of intolerance results in the lower rate of investment, which in turn results in poor employment opportunities and poor socioeconomic status of the people. In these situations, the benefit of a CPEC can become questionable and uncertain. So now it's time to change ourselves and put our nation on the path of economic growth and prosperity through implementation of tolerating behavior in society. This can be made possible if people become tolerant, because if a people of the society are intolerant towards the people of other religions, sects, races, and languages, then the essence of the economic growth through this multi-billion project will be shadowed. Hence, tolerance can play a vital role in maximizing the benefit of CPEC. So through attracting more and more investment, creating employment opportunities, and hence improving the economic status of the households. So the household income is referred as economic consequences of CPEC. So now I am comparing that is tolerant behavior affect the household income, which is probably the possible income of impact of a CPEC. So there is, I'm going to skip the slides. The question is, how can tolerance increase the economic well-being of an individual at micro levels? To ensure this answer, the present study take help from psychology literature. In the psychology literature, personality is mostly represented by using 5-factor model of personality. Openness to experience is one of the factors in the 5-factor model of personality. Openness to experience indicates the degree to which a person are creative, imaginative, broad-minded, curious, and non-traditional. This also shows that persons who are highly open to experience tend to be more tolerant. Thus, a person with high openness to experience tend to be flexible and willing to accept different perspectives, even though they may be unfamiliar, which allow greater access to new experiences and perspectives, and this in turn results in increasing creative performance. As also confirmed by the study of Proto and Ricciani, that openness to experience have a positive impact on income. Personality development affects the individual performance on the work in such a way that it will lead to higher compensation. Well, basically, it is the primary data study, and I take four towns of the Peshawar district, because basically Peshawar is distributed in 4 towns, and in 4 towns I select 4 union councils, in which the study is conducted. This studies, the questionnaire consists of the information relevant to tolerance, household income, age, education, employment status, marital status, location of residence, gender of the bread earner of the household, and dependency ratio. The respondent of the study is the main bread earner of the household. Data was collected through convenient means. Proportional allocation of total sample size is as follow. I have a total 384 sample, and then I have constructed the questions. These are the tolerance questions based on that how we behave to people with other languages, sects, religion, and other nations. So these are the 20 questions, and I compacted it through using the principal component analysis and to find an index that is called household tolerance index. So now this index will be is the representative of a tolerance in any household level. So skip. I have basically estimated a log linear regression model, and the economic variable consists of some of the economic variables that are impacting my income, and these also consist of some control variables. My independent variable are household size, education, age, gender, dependency ratio, location, and residential status of the household, that is native or immigrant, and household tolerance index. As these are some of the assumptions of the regression model, which is most likely it follows, I guess, all the assumptions. So we are good to go to apply the orderly least square method. So here we have some results that household tolerance index is positively related on household income, education is positively related, household size, dependency ratio, and well, tolerance plays an important role in economic growth and well-being of a society. Household tolerance index is positively related to household income. Other variables such as gender, household size, education are positively and significantly affect household income, while dependency ratio is negatively associated with household income. As number of dependents increases in the household, it impact negatively on household income, because number of earners decreases. It is also concluded from the findings of the study that tolerance plays a vital role in maximizing the benefit of CPEC through improving the economic status of the household. And here are some recommendations, as it is inferred from the study that tolerant behavior led to development of a society as a whole. So there is a need to inculcate tolerant behaviors in the society to reduce violence and terrorism, which is already plaguing the country, and especially the area where the study is conducted. Media, religious and educational institutions, and parents who are raising their offspring can engineer the tolerance in their offsprings, which will increase the tolerance in the society, which will lead to a better living standards. Thank you. That's all.
Now we can ask the discussant who is online on Skype to discuss both the papers. Ali, you have only 7 minutes to discuss the two papers.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम जी अली कमाल मोहम्मद अली कमाल है, और सबसे पहले I will congratulate PSDE और उनकी team. They have done a commendable job in selecting these two papers at least, which are given to me for review. And over time, I want to specify, हर दफ़ा बहुत सारे लोग specify करते रहते हैं कि जो पेपर की क्वालिटीज़ हैं जो कि एक्सेप्ट हो रहे हैं वो बहुत अच्छे हैं, and I felt difficulty in reviewing these papers. And having said this, first of all, I would like to comment on the first paper which is presented today, which was on the income growth, trade expansion, and the ecological footprints. मैं बेसिकली आजकल SDGs पे काम कर रहा हूँ, और उसमें ये दोनों इंडिकेटर्स बहुत इम्पोर्टेंट हैं, income growth का भी और ecological footprints का भी. I believe I checked with some person that is there any non-Urdu speaking persons that are sitting here, so I have been told that they are not. So हो सकता है मैं bilingual हो जाऊँ दरम्यान में करती हूँ. Okay, very quick and few comments on the paper. Number one is it was a thesis which is done under the supervision of Dr. Rehana Siddiqui, and it is a good thesis. Now I think it is accepted in the PSDE, and you have presented it here. I would ask you to go back and write it in a proper paper format, because it's still a thesis. Second comment, which is maybe I'm totally wrong, but what I get feeling, what I feel from the overall paper, that the way ARDL is estimated in this paper, I have little reservations. So please check with econometrics people, though Dr. Rehana is also an econometrics person. Econometrics person who knows ARDL very much in PIDE or in any other university. उनसे check करवा लें, vet करवा लें whether your ARDL estimation जो आप लोगों ने की है at that is correct. If it is correct, तो हम आगे चलते हैं. Could you please explain the reference जिसमें coefficient of capital income per capita income growth square is so high? Because the thing is this gives us overall optimal and threshold level of per capita income growth. And is it possible, again, another comment is it possible to check level effect of per capita income as well? Because you have included per capita income growth and per capita income growth square. There is no reference per capita level or level of per capita income in your equation. Whether it is a good idea to include it, whether some people have included it or not, what difference does that make if you include it? Because level effect is absent right now in it. Last point, which will be very important for the policy making, relate to your finding with the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. For example, 8.11 indicator, Goal 8, Target 1, Indicator 1, is about the per capita real GDP growth, and there are several other material footprints and consumption footprints and import footprints targets and indicators on the ecological footprint per capita, which are included in the Sustainable Development Goals, which are present there. Therefore, I would want you to elaborate by calculating the optimal or threshold level of ecological footprint for both imports and domestic consumption per capita and per capita income growth as well. I believe, which I have calculated from your equation, which is reported in table 4.3, that optimal level of per capita income growth is 2%, which is too low. Right now we are at 1%, but we are expecting that it will grow for more than 4% or 4.5% to include the youth bulge in the society. And still we are thinking of how to get back the youth which is going out and which has settled outside in the universities or in other departments in the world. So this is a little tricky because we are also looking at the growth, and then you are talking about the ecological footprint. We need to balance it. So we need higher growth per capita to absorb the upcoming youth bulge in the economy. So considering this, calculate number one, calculate optimal threshold level for each equation, as well as compare it with the Vision 25, 5-year plan per capita income growth, and Sustainable Development Goal targets of footprint and per capita GDP. So these are some of my few comments on this paper, which will be hopefully helpful for you, for me, and for other people who will read your paper and then apply it as in a policy making exercise. On the second paper, which was presented on the nexus between socio-economic impact of CPEC and tolerance, a case study of District Peshawar. It is indeed a very good paper. If any student wants to learn about the art of citations, this paper will be very helpful because every line is cited, complete references, marvelous citations. Though there are two statements which I believe that they should be cited as well, which I will say it in the end. But if any student wants to learn that how to cite any paper or how to write introduction, literature review, this paper is the paper for them. The topic chosen by the authors is very timely, and it is a need of further time because people are talking about tolerance, and they are saying that Chinese are difficult people. We have not been involved with those people for a very long time, and let's see what happens when the CPEC comes. So there are so much propaganda of CPEC, anti-CPEC lobbyists. There's another view of tolerance which is not captured in this paper, which I have mentioned. that what will happen when the Chinese people come here, because they have different heating habits, they have different sleeping habits, they have different, all kind of habits are very different, because I talk to many people in CPEC, many Chinese people and many people who are also involved in with the Chinese government, with the Chinese people other than CPEC, and they are scaring us. So one of the things which is missing in this paper was uh, that no question was addressed on the Chinese involvement in Pakistan's economy and what will happen and how they will tolerate those habits. Individuals who work with the Chinese, again, I'm saying this thing, that they are propagating that it will be extremely difficult to work with these people because they have different habits. Um, if I may suggest to do a factor analysis before applying principal component analysis on all the 20 variables, then it will leave. Sorry, I was disconnected due to some reason. Okay, I'll start with the same comment. If I may suggest to do a factor analysis, because they have collected 20 variables on tolerance. So not all the 20 variables are good variables to explain tolerance. Maybe there are a few variables which are not explaining tolerance very well, and they are not connected with the other variables. So I may suggest to do a factor analysis before applying a principal component analysis on all the 20 variables. Then it will leave the insignificant ones, and you will have the significant variables with you. On those variables, you can apply principal component analysis and come up with a better index of tolerance. Another small comment is that dependency ratio may be correlated with the household size, because if maybe there are two earners, so dependency ratio is different than household size. But if there is only one earner, then dependency ratio could be very similar. Could be very similar. So if they are related, so my suggestion is to drop one variable, because you can see that one variable is positive and one variable is negative. So my suggestion would be either drop one of the variables or divide your household income, which is dependent variable, with the household size, which gives you per capita income of each household. So that will be another variable if you want to run a re-regression for your analysis. Last two comments, that you have used age in your estimation. I would urge, if possible, if your data allows, that use experience, which is age minus when he started a job. Maybe you have it in your data. So use experience instead of age, and that will improve your results maybe. As I mentioned at the start, that though the citations are very proper in this paper, there are two statements which need citations, because these are two most important statements, and this will be quoted in several articles, in several papers, in several newspaper articles. And that is, the project will also provide employment opportunities to over 1 million of people. This is a very strong statement. Million of people, 2 million of people, 1.5 million of people, and there's another study which says only 50,000. So you need to cite this thing or write it in some other way. The second statement, which is also very important, and it will be quoted as well, the developmental nodes of CPEC includes Kashi, Texorgan, Gujarat, Islamabad, Lahore, Multan, Sakkar, Karachi, Peshawar, Quetta, Gilgit, and Govt. This needs citation as well, because it doesn't, to me, reflect the road connectivity, the SCZs, or electricity power plants. So these two statements also need citations. Otherwise, the paper is very good. Both the papers are very good. Both the papers are very are done in a very good format. So these are my few comments. मैं उम्मीद करता हूँ कि जी आप लोगों को जो है ये फायदेमंद हो. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. Okay, would you like to respond to his comments first? So, Imran, first, brief, very brief.
Thank you, sir, for your kind comments. Sir, first you talk about the inclusion of per capita income square. This is basically the theory of Kuznets, which see the first income growth affect environment negatively, but if we include the income square, that will show us that up to this extent, when the income grows, there shows a negative, there shows a demand for environment by society. So we have included by due to that reason to see either for Pakistan is there any ecological EKC exist or do not exist. Second is, sir, you talk about the references of a high income square coefficient. Is there any reference? We have Shabazz 2013-11 and Adley Ecker SEC 2015. We have followed these two papers methodology wise, and we have desegregated basically the paper of Ecker 2015. Optimal level of threshold yes sir, we haven't mentioned that. We will mention that in comments inshallah. And last is so you talk about the SDGs, and from SDGs we can see, sir, we have included all those indicators, standards which were available up to 2015 when I was writing this paper. So we will take care about all those indicators inshallah. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, I will really appreciate the valuable comments. I will try to incorporate it for the paper's quality. What Chinese will do, or what Chinese, or whether Chinese are tolerant or not, I guess similar study needs to be conducted on Chinese side. Yes, Chinese are different, but as we know that most of the countries which are developed are more diverse. So if we accept more diversity, not only in case of China, but in case of India and Afghanistan, because we have more similarity with Indians and Afghans. So I guess positive impact of tolerance can be achieved on economic consequences. Thank you.
Okay, Ali, thank you very much. And any pressing comment, or you can discuss with all these authors who presented the paper will be available on T. You can discuss it with them if you have any questions or reservations about it. Okay, so with this we can conclude the session.